Hey guys, welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about influences and taste and how these two things together can either make or break you as an artist, in my opinion. So, why do influences come up? It's really big, I think, in the industry. If you look around, there's a lot of people out there who do tons of work, and in a lot of ways, I feel like it's starting to look the same. And I feel like a lot of it is a result of people looking at each other's work and looking at the same workflow processes, the same tutorials, and the same influences. And as a result, you get a really homogeneous family of work that's all in the same vein. And this can work to your advantage, especially if you're trying to get specific jobs at specific places. Like Blizzard has a really specific look, and it's great. I think their stuff is really well designed for their games, and that top down view needs those, big shoulder pads and really big design cues that are going to give people a quick read. But there's a lot of room, I think, in the artistic community to grow, especially within the concept art community, since it's such a young industry still. So for me, I think one of my first influences was actually Jurassic Park. So if you look back to what you were drawing when you were a kid or why you started drawing, you'll realize that, this was really your first influence. And for me, a lot of that came from Jurassic Park and dinosaurs and just being able to draw the things I wanted when I was a kid, and it was really fun. And there's no purpose for it. I wasn't, like a 5-year-old kid trying to get a job at, in a film industry job or something. So, we naturally intake a lot of information over the course of our lives, and a lot of us, as we get older in our artistic careers, you start to realize, you become really concerned with realism, or you become really concerned with what other people will think of your work or how it'll be perceived. Do I look too much like this influence? Do I look too much like that influence? Am I really a unique artist? All of these are valid questions that you're going to ask yourself over and over again. But a lot of people don't realize that, influences are a big part of it. And I think it was Noah Bradley was talking one time about how if you feel like your style is too similar to somebody else, you might want to try looking at another artist and try looking at more artists and bringing in more influences instead of less. So I think there's two ways to solve that problem, but I'll talk a little bit about that more later. I think everybody knows the saying, you are what you eat. So a lot of times the food we're eating is going to influence the way our bodies feel. And similarly with art, the art you're looking at, and that you're intaking is going to influence what you output. So, for the piece I'm working on here, actually, one of my biggest influences was probably Miyazaki and the Studio Ghibli films that I had been watching, in the weeks before doing this piece. It just kind of stuck in my brain, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And that's all right, because I'm willing to share that. A lot of times you'll see influences crop up, and somebody will intake information. They'll eat the food of one artist, and they'll spit it back out, and when it comes out, it's, not a carbon copy of the original piece, but there's a drastic influence on it. And, a lot of people get really concerned, like, oh, this guy's copying this guy's, taking this piece. And I think, honestly, so much of that would be solved if people just said, oh, hey, if you can recognize it's influenced by somebody, you can just say, I was looking at this artist, or it's influenced by this, and all of that disappears. People don't care anymore because you're giving credit where credit's due. And it's not like the your piece is owned by the artist who did it or anything like that. But I think it just solves a lot of the bickering and stuff I saw as a student. Like, oh, did you see this guy copied this piece or something? And, you can have a debate about, how much copying is like. Obviously, there's plagiarism where you're taking something directly and just using it one for one. And, I personally think that's pretty wrong. I'd agree. I think most people would agree that's pretty negative. But at the same time, it's okay to look at different artists and, try combining the foundations of what you can learn from them. So one of my favorite things to do is master copy and break down why something is working, why something is pushing the boundaries, and why you like it, why you tune into it. So that comes into play with taste. So these two things I think go hand in hand. And a big part of taste is looking at a lot of art. It's looking at, stuff outside your own scope. So I think there's a diagram that Paul Richards did, and he has this great way of breaking down, what's your comfort zone, what's your your knowledgeable zone, stuff about and that you're moderately influenced by, but you have no like real rapport with it, you haven't studied it deeply. And then there's stuff you don't know anything about. And when you're thinking about these three categories, you want to try to make that comfort zone as big as you can, that intermediate zone smaller, and your unknowable zone or unknown zone the smallest. So for me, I started in product design, and I really liked products, industrial design, transportation design. I wanted to do all those things at one point. And then I started looking at painters a lot more. I started looking at people like Jenny Saville, John Singer Sargent, and, who else? Peter Paul Rubens is really good. And all these guys started influencing my work and what I liked and my tastes. And as you look at more and more artists, you incorporate these tastes into your work. And, everybody I think has a natural baseline of what they like or what they don't like. Some people love flat shapes and love just pure flat color. For me, I love brushstrokes, and I love being able to turn form, and I see things in light and shadow. I don't see things in flat shapes as much. Of course, you need to be able to analyze things from different perspectives. So I try and learn about shapes and the rules behind why flatter work can work and why it can be appealing. So your taste is, you have a natural baseline, but at the same time you want to push that taste. And it's kind of like, again, to the food example, you want to try and taste different art from around the world, from different cultures, different time periods. And one way you can look at time periods is to, if you like somebody's work, let's say, you like, Andrew Loomis, you can find his teacher and find his teacher and find that teacher's teacher all the way back to the 1500s sometimes. And it's crazy how much you can see styles change and evolve over time, and how the student is taking the teacher's work and kind of reshaping it in a way, or incorporating something new or doing something different to break from their initial studies. In the case of influence over time, I think, if your influences aren't growing over time, you can kind of stagnate. You kind of stop taking in information, and as a result, your work can stop evolving in a way. But at the same time, there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, I've had periods where I will stop looking at other people's work completely. And, you can get off Facebook, get off Instagram, Tumblr, all that stuff, and just focus on you and see what you come up with. And I think it takes a little while. Takes probably, say, for me at least, a couple of months to really get into the headspace of where I felt comfortable playing in my own zone and saying, oh, okay, this is something that I'm trying to experiment with on my own, and that I can say, oh, that's original or new to me at least, and I haven't seen something that's directly influencing me, again, because of the way influences work, it's always working in the background of your head. So yeah, you got to be able to analyze everything that's out there, take it in and spit out something that you think is worthy of being shown to everybody. And, even if it's just a little sketch, you can see the difference between somebody who is trying to do something and somebody who's being really honest with their work. So a lot of times I will look at portfolios and I can see, oh, this guy is looking at X artist, X artist, X artist. And, I can see this piece is influenced by that piece online. And it's a fun little game to play, kind of. But at the same time, I wish so many more people would branch out and explore different mediums and different techniques. And, we live in this information age where Gumroad and all these other tutorials that are being put out are amazing. Seriously, there's so much information in there that you can learn from. But I think the mistake is when people start taking these as rules or taking them at a value of this is the way it's done and this is the only way to do it. I think there's room for illustration and different techniques to be incorporated, and really that's how you can make a name for yourself. I think I went to a Schoolism Live workshop with Craig Mullins, Carlo Ortiz, and Jeff Turley, and some other amazing people. And Carla was talking about how, training in traditional mediums and traditional oil painting and, doing these master copies and sculptural studies from a young age, that she was able to really incorporate that traditional technique into her work process for illustration and concept art that she does now. And as a result, I think her work is pretty standout amongst a lot of the other people who are using photos or 3D. And not to say those things are bad. She just separates herself in that way because she's trained differently. Craig Mullins actually picked up on that too, and he mentioned her while he was doing his little demo. So it was a cool little shout out. And in that same lecture, I think Jeff Turley was talking about style and how, the style can change from show to show, and you need to be ready for that, obviously. But as an aspiring artist or a student artist, when you're learning, I think it's really good to experiment with as many things as you can. You can take all those influences and, you can learn from somebody like Bernie Fuchs, how he uses light and shadow and how he simplifies the shadow side down to, one value almost, and how he's able to build up the lights. There's a lot of artists out there that we can learn from as a community. And I think a lot of people get trapped in that one track mind of it has to look flashy, it has to look a certain way. And somewhere where I see, styles opening up a lot actually is from the illustration side of things. And it's really cool to see unique voices coming out through there and coming up with their own styles and their own voices over time. So I think you can look at different schools, and different schools have different looks, but within those schools of thought, you get really, really unique people. And yeah, it's kind of just like a nice little way to think about things, breaking them down into their essence, and then taking that foundation knowledge and using that as a springboard for moving your own work instead of taking the surface value of stuff. Like, for example, like the question of, what brushes do you use comes up all the time in concept art forums and within the community, and people are obsessed with getting, that if I get that brush, it's going to make me a better artist, or it's going to make me perfect. And it's not as important as I think people give it value, especially early on. If you look at Craig Mullins, his first digital paintings had a ton of character, and he was just using a circle brush. And again, it comes down to not so much the tricks or techniques that you're using, and it's more about the knowledge you have and the ability to translate that into the medium you're using. So if you understand how light hits a form, or how, atmospheric perspective works, you can make that work in 3D, you can make that work in 2D. It doesn't really matter whether or not you're using this specific brushstroke or this specific, technique that you learned from an artist or a class. And again, I'm not saying that stuff is bad. It's just easier to break into your own creative work, in my opinion, when you're doing work that you enjoy and using the knowledge you have. So in regards to developing your taste over time, when you're starting out as an artist, you have maybe a few key influences. And I think sometimes it's interesting to go in the opposite direction and find who is like the most opposite of your influence that you can find. So if you start with somebody who's, a classic painter, maybe you can go to somebody who's in printmaking and only using, CMYK flat prints and doing silk screens, and having that influencing you. And similarly, when I was in school, I was lucky enough to be able to take a couple of classes that I felt helped me break out of my box as an artist. So I took a creative writing class and some independent studies with that, and was able to take a video game writing class and think about mechanics of video games instead of like the art or design of a specific character or environment. I ended up thinking about, how would systems work? How does dialogue work in a game, and how does storytelling work in a game? Not so much from a visual perspective, but from a mechanics perspective and systems perspective. Also, in that development, I think I took a printmaking class, which was really difficult for me because I hadn't worked in a traditional medium in a while. I mean, I always paint and stuff, but I hadn't done any kind of silk screening or intaglio printing press work before. So it was like a whole new world that I got to explore. But I found that a lot of the tenets, a lot of the foundations that I had learned transfer over. And I think the same thing happens when you go into like 3D. I mostly stick to 2D concept art, but from what I know of 3D, learning in Modo and Maya and stuff, a lot of the knowledge that I have about lighting and shading and the properties of light and color transfer over into 3D just as well as they do in 2D. I just have to learn how to recognize it and use those tools differently. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this little talk, and you guys got to see some of the process behind this image snow melt that I'd been working on. If you guys like this video and want to check out more of my artwork, you can check out the links in the description. And if you want to join me live, you can join me at twitch.tv/Thomas Centeno. on Sundays from 1 to 5 Pacific Standard Time. See you there, and thanks for watching.